Welcome to episode 179 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter and co-founder of ScriptFest, Bob Schultz. We talk about ScriptFest a bit, but we also dig into his own writing career. He has 2 feature films coming out this year, and we dig into exactly how he made those films happen. So stay tuned for that interview. If you feel this episode is valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts, and then just look for episode number 179. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I'll teach you the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline and query letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing screenwriter and co-founder of ScriptFest, Bob Schultz. Here is the interview. Welcome, Bob, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be back.
So you came on the podcast, believe it or not, almost 2 years ago. It's episode 87, and we talked a lot about the PitchFest and pitching in general. So I'm going to just link to that in the show notes, and I'm going to encourage people to check that podcast episode out. You talk about a lot of the history with the PitchFest and how all of that works. I just wanted to touch, when is your PitchFest this year? I think we can get those dates in case people are wondering when that's going on.
Sure. We are back in Burbank, California at the Marriott. Once again, it's our 14th annual event, and we will be June 23rd through 25th, 2017.
Okay, perfect. And for people who listen to this episode after that date, is there some sort of general logic to when you run these events, just for 2018, 19, and beyond, roughly when they'll be held or why you hold them at certain times? Anything that just people can kind of figure out?
Typically, we are in May each year, May or June. We try to keep it around the same time of year so people can plan their visits. This year, we moved to June because of some problems with the hotel, and we decided to surrender our May dates and move on to June just to be good team players. And so, but look for us in May of 2018, probably.
Okay, perfect. So you're a screenwriter as well as running PitchFest. So I wanted to dive into 2 of your current feature films. The first one is Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Mania. Maybe to start out, you can kind of just give us the pitch or logline for that.
Sure. I mean, Blood Mania came to me. It was a straight up offer of work. I made some contacts in the Calgary, Alberta film industry in working on some previous projects, and one of the contacts there had a contact to Herschel Gordon Lewis, who is known as the Godfather of Gore. He's a horror movie legend, epic legend, died in the last year, unfortunately. But so they wanted to do an anthology movie, basically 4 short stories, maybe like Creep Show or like the Twilight Zone, the movie, this sort of thing. And they wanted me to write one of the segments. So they approached me and said, "Do you want to work with Herschel Gordon Lewis?" And I essentially said, any chance to work with one of my idols is fine by me. We had Michael Berryman in Below Zero, and so I said sure. So I wrote a short for it, and it was hard work. It's, as someone who worked really hard on spec scripts and wanting to be a writer for so many years, getting offered a higher job to me was like the greatest thing in the world, because you can then start considering yourself with 2 pieces of writing: first the screenplay, and secondly the writing of your name on a check. Mm-hmm. Which is really a nice little treat for a writer. So, yeah, I was thrilled to do it, and the movie only recently was recently distributed, and it's doing pretty well from what I understand.
Okay, perfect. And you mentioned just a second ago that you had made contacts over the years in Canada. Maybe you can talk about how you made those contacts. I think that would be interesting, because that's sort of the million-dollar question: is how do you get yourself in the position that these people know you and offer you these jobs?
Well, you know what? The answer to that question is to always be working on it, to always be networking. What was it in Glengarry Glen Ross? ABC. A, always be, B, C, closing. Always be closing. It's, the film industry is an industry of relationships. And I like to say that everyone you meet, you're striving for friendship with an agenda. You want to be able to work with somebody in the future. If you have a need, or if they have a need, or someone, you want to be the one they think of. So it's important to be yourself, be professional, shake hands with people, have a good sense of humor, be honest, be direct. All these things that they tell you to do in job interviews, basically you need to do all the time. And particularly for writers who can be very reclusive or isolating of themselves, it's even more important to, whenever you're at a festival or at a networking event or something, to force yourself to go out there and shake hands and say hello to everyone you meet. I met these folks coincidentally. It's like they're friends of friends, or someone ran a horror convention and decided they wanted me as a guest, and instead of just saying yes and then leaving the conversation there saying, so what are you interested in and what do you work on when you're not working on the convention, it becomes critical to just make sure that very few people will post something, I'm looking for a writer. Instead, they will contact the writers they already know and who they can trust to produce a screenplay for them. So I met them, and then I maintained contact with them for as long as it took, and I'm still in touch with them.
Yeah, perfect. So maybe we can talk a little bit about your other film, Breakdown Lane. Again, maybe to start out, you can kind of just give us an overview or pitch of that film.
Sure. I wrote Breakdown Lane on spec. Zombie movie, basically a woman driving through the desert, her car breaks down, and she's stuck out there all by herself with her car and the zombies. And what she has to do is push the empty, broken down car through the desert as a lifeboat for when the zombies come. The way I conceptualized it and the way the movie turned out aren't exactly the same. Some of our money people decided they wanted some changes, and they made those changes. But the important thing is, once again, it was contacts we made. I was a producer on a movie called Below Zero, which Signe Olenek wrote. And that movie took us around the world on a festival tour. And during the festival tour, I met people who could help out on Breakdown Lane. And as a result, Breakdown Lane got produced. Now, like I said, it's not the movie that I originally envisioned, but that's the nature of filmmaking. The script is just step one, and then what follows is going to require the input of everybody else, the producers, the director, the location, the costume designer, the stars. Everyone has some say. And as a result, you wind up with something that isn't 100% what you intended, but hopefully makes audiences happy.
Yeah. And maybe discuss, too, you co-directed Breakdown Lane. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got on as a director. I get this a lot from writers. Hey, I've got this piece. I want to direct it too. How should I approach producers? And I'm always leery to recommend that they, attach themselves as a director when they don't have any, professional experience directing. So maybe you can talk about how you were able to get on as a co-director on this.
Well, I mean, ultimately, as the one person who was looking to maintain my original vision, I had some difficulty convincing others of it. So they said, okay, why don't you just direct it and show us what you mean? And to be honest with you, I see myself as a writer a lot more than as a director. And given the opportunity to direct again, I would probably say, no, you just go ahead and find a director. I'll be happy to write it. It's not where my skill set lies and not where my passion lies, but I could only learn that by doing it. And so I think it's important to make compromises when you're a writer, and directors sort of have the final say. So these writers who are insisting on directing something themselves, I think typically those who insist on directing something themselves are really trying to protect their script or protect their story the way they see it. And my advice to them is typically, I think a better idea is for you to write something else that you're not so passionate about turning out exactly the way you want it, and let somebody else direct it. Like as you said, Ashley, you have very little influence over the process if you're just starting out. And so to insist that you're going to be the director, to make it a deal breaker, means the deal's probably going to break. So I think it's better to write a script that you're willing to give away in order to sort of build some of that political capital that you need in order to direct the one that you want to direct.
Okay, perfect. I want to back up and just touch on something you just mentioned. Did you co-produce a film and you took this film to film festivals around the world? Is that
Yes, that's right.
Okay, what was the name of that film?
Below Zero?
Okay, Below Zero. Okay, and so maybe you could talk about that, even just stepping that back a little bit, talk about that film a little bit in terms of how you got that one produced and how you did that. A lot of things, I get a lot of writers, they do a short film and it doesn't go, viral, and they think that that's it means it's not a success. And I feel like there's a lot of opportunity in these films that people maybe never hear of outside of the industry, but what you're talking about, you get them into a couple festivals and it's kind of just a stepping stone to kind of that sort of first point in the industry where they can start to actually meet people, and a short film or even a feature film, a low budget feature film in festivals. So maybe you can just talk about your experience. What happened to that film? How successful was it? And how did you get it produced?
Sure. My producing partner, Signe Olenek, she's the creator of the PitchFest, and we operated together. She's also my go-to to read scripts that I wrote, and she's very important. I think it's very important to have a network who is close to you, whose opinions you trust, and who you can give scripts to, whether it's one person or a writing group or whatever. So I went through a little bit of a rough patch there for a little bit. I wrote a couple scripts that very similar projects got produced and got distributed with big names. So basically my scripts just died on the vine. I wrote one about a mall cop that was ready to go at Imagine Entertainment, and it was all set up, and then Paul Blart was suddenly getting produced, and I'm not Kevin James, so I don't have that kind of impact, and so my project just died. And I was really frustrated and really feeling down on myself. And then Signe contacted me and said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're each going to write a script that is very low budget, very few locations, very small cast. And based on that, we're going to each write a script, and we're just going to produce them ourselves. No more of this waiting around for Imagine Entertainment to say no. We're going to just go ahead and make them ourselves. So she went off and she wrote Below Zero, and I went off and I wrote Breakdown Lane. And we did Below Zero first, and it turned out amazing. It's a really, really good film, and we got good cast, and we got into all kinds of festivals for it. And based on the festivals is how we launched off of there. So it got produced because we wrote screenplays specifically to get produced under circumstances that we could provide. I encourage anyone who wants to take this course of action with their career to assess their lives, see what they have access to that can raise the production values of a film without necessarily raising the budget. If I were to do it again, I would know that my uncle has a Ferrari, and I know that my mother is the pastor of a country church. So I could write something set place in a country church with a car chase involving a Ferrari with very little additional expense added to my budget. I could get those things for free, but it adds production value to the movie. So write something with an eye toward producing it yourself if you like, and then just go ahead and do it. All producing is a very, very, very long to-do list. You think of everything you need, you hire people, you get crew, you get gear, and you go, And so Below Zero sort of opened some doors, and Breakdown Lane opened a few and closed a few, and Blood Mania the same. And I'm working on I have one now that is out to producers with produce credits, good producers, and it's getting me representation. Plus, for my own sake, I'm producing a short that I wrote as well, animated short. I've never worked in that before, but I think it's important to always be generating material, whether it's screenplays or films or shorts or whatever it is. Always be generating new material, because it's easier to steer a ship that's in motion than to start from a stop.
Yeah. Excellent advice. So let's talk just a minute about your writing process. I'd just be curious to kind of hear how you work. How much time do you spend in the outlining stage versus the actual opening up final draft and writing script pages?
I spend 0.00 minutes on the outlining process. I am not the example you want to hold up in front of new writers. I say that with full knowledge. I also teach screenwriting at a college out here in Arizona, and I teach the importance of structure, and I think structure is extremely critical in storytelling. But I also get an electric charge out of that creation process. So I like to sit down and do what we refer to as dirty headlights writing. It's like driving in a car with dirty headlights. You can see a foot in front of you, and sometimes that means you wind up someplace exciting that you've never seen before, and sometimes it means you slam into a wall. It's it's problematic. But when I finish a script first, I don't even call it a first draft. I call it a zero draft. It's like no one even gets to see it. It's usually in 200 and something pages long. It is flabby. The structure is all out of whack. The character arcs are no good. The theme is muddy. But how that helps me is I also get to know my characters better because I sort of follow them around until they do something interesting. And I get to sort of discover new ideas and thoughts that I hadn't thought of before. And so I tend to write that zero draft and then whittle it down into a structure. That's just what works best for me. And I don't know if you or if any of your listeners have experienced this, but I'll write something and write a joke, write a punchline to a joke, and I will burst out laughing right there at my computer because it surprised me. And I start thinking, well, how can I be surprised? It came out of my brain through my fingers into my computer. There's no way that I've had that moment of that thrilling moment of discovery, and yet I did. So I mean, I don't want to get all philosophical about it. I'm just channeling something else, but the reality is that, like, by sort of throwing myself into the world of the screenplay instead of outlining, I get to discover these things that entertain and delight me. And I'm a big believer that the first draft of the script, the audience that matters the most is yourself. As soon as you start sending scripts out to consultants or to producers or to actors or agents or whatever else, they're going to come back with notes, and all of a sudden it starts belonging to the world instead of belonging just to you. So that first draft I write for Bob to be entertained by, and then after that it becomes a compromise between Bob and this other person if they make good points or good ideas.
Yeah. So tell me, what do you have before you open up Final Draft? Do you have like a log line? Do you have just a loose beginning, middle, and end in your head? Do you start with a character and then find your story? What do you start with if you're not going in with an outline?
It varies from time to time. Usually, for example, on Breakdown Lane, there was a theme that I wanted to explore. So I started with theme, and with the theme, I sort of devised characters and devised circumstances that would allow me to sort of pick at that theme. With my current script, all I had was a title. The one I'm working on right now, it's called Hitlersaurus. Hitler's brain and T-Rex, right? Uh-huh. It's literally a one-word pitch. You can sit down with any executives and say, Hitlersaurus, and they'll either say, let me read that, or they'll say, get out of my office. Those are really the only two options. Which is great. I mean, both give you information. If someone's not really going to sort of 100% get behind a movie called Hitlersaurus with an exclamation point, then you don't want them to be part of your project anyway. So I had a title, and I decided that it would be fun to do certain things in the script. I mean, clearly it can't be a heart-wrenching drama with the title Hitlersaurus. So you sort of get the tone already, and you get what it's going to be. But then at the same time, where do you go with the story? What are the steps in the story? What are the beats that have to be hit? And I just sort of let the script write itself. So I start with the protagonist. Intro the protagonist. Protagonist is this is such a person, and she has these fatal flaws that she has to overcome. And you assign the fatal flaws to be a lesson that can be learned while in pursuit of a Tyrannosaurus Rex with a Hitler mustache. So it's important, I think, for writers in particular to, even if you're writing something like Sharknado or you're writing something like Hitlersaurus, that as writers we consider it important to have metaphor and theme and to say something about the world, even with something that's kind of silly. I think of it as like when I have to give my dog a pill and I wrap the pill in a piece of bread. My message is the pill. Something fun to swallow is the piece of bread, like Hitlersaurus, and you stick it in there. So it's like some of that stuff's in there just for me, just for the 1 out of a million people who see the movie that are going to get the message. But it's important to have it in there. So there's no reason to sort of dismiss any movie or any TV series or any book or whatever you're writing. I think as writers, we have a sacred trust to make that writing good and entertaining and something that people want to see.
Yeah. So just going back to Breakdown Lane for a second, like just through your process, when did you decide that was a zombie movie? Because that's a very particular type of film. And if you just start writing, again, just shed a little light on sort of your process with that one.
Sure. Okay. So with Breakdown Lane, the theme that I wanted to explore was not so much a direct point that I wanted to make. It was more sort of examining a human tendency, a human trait, right? And so I was fascinated by the relationship that humans have with technology. I was fascinated by how Sydney and I can be sitting 4 feet apart from each other, and we'll send each other text messages, even though I could just look up from my screen and say, hey, what do you think of this? And so that's bad. That sort of separates us from each other using technology. However, on the flip side of that, I have a nephew who lives in Anchorage, Alaska, and I never get to interact with him directly, but we both, because I have the taste of a 16-year-old boy when it comes to pop culture, we both love the TV show The Flash, right? And season one, they finally got to Gorilla Grodd, the giant psychic gorilla who interacts with people, favorite bad guy. And so I'm texting with my nephew, I can't believe tonight's Grodd night, and finally Grodd comes on the TV, and I pause the TV, and I take a selfie of myself with the TV behind me, just hey, it's me and Grodd, and I send it to James. Several hours later, when the episode is now being screened in Anchorage, he takes a picture of himself doing the exact same thing and sends it back to me. It's a great way for me to stay in touch with my family who's far, far away using technology. I interact with my brothers all the time, even though I'm thousands of miles from each of them. So that use of technology to both separate and bring together humans was something I was very interested in. So I decided, having this woman trapped in the desert, and the only person she can interact with is the person on the OnStar system in her car who's in his office way back someplace else. So she winds up falling in love with this guy, which is great. That's how technology brings us together. But she also has a boyfriend who she only communicates with via text. She uses that to separate them. So she doesn't like people. I have characters who are kind of misanthropic in that way. And to represent the humanity that sort of bothers her, I chose to use zombies because they can be a faceless horde that seem pretty harmless until they get close to you. And I think that sort of responded well to her personality in that way. I think that, it is a very particular type of movie, but I think there's a tradition of using zombies in that way. I really believe that when they were making Dawn of the Dead, when Romero was making Dawn of the Dead, and his zombies sort of are humans that are stripped down to their most elemental, fundamental nature with no ego whatsoever, and then had them all shuffle mindlessly to the mall, I feel like he was saying something about humanity and about how we interact in America, and about malls. Particularly about malls and the mall culture. So I think that it's important to. I think it's not as far-reaching as you think. Also, I really kind of dig zombies. So step one can be, what theme do I want to explore, and step two can be, how do I best use zombies to explore that theme. I'm not doing zombies with Hitlersaurus, and the short I'm producing is not about zombies either, but it's suited the horror genre, which I've been a fan of since I was a kid, and it allowed me to sort of explore my theme a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, so let's, again, dig into this writing process a little bit. So when you get going on a script, how many pages per day can you churn out? What's a good day for you? And do you typically have 8 hours, or do you do an hour or two and then work on other projects? What does that sort of writing, when you get into the flow of things, look like for you?
When I get into the flow of things, I will write 16 hours in a day, and then not again for 2.5 days. It's one of these, once I get the momentum rolling, I never, ever, ever want to stop. And then, if I have it, look, I'm not proud of this, but when I'm writing and I have a day job, I will call in sick to work if it's going well. It's it's too precious an experience to finally be, you always hear about it on shows like Wire and other projects that involve drug use. Once you get that high, you're always chasing that high again. And for me, the high is, I see the story in my head and I'm just writing it. It's like I feel powerless before. I just need to have it happen. And on those times when I do stop writing and go to a day job or do something else, my brain is always like, I can't believe I left my characters in that situation. I got to get back and save them, Mm-hmm. So I sort of wind up in this weird reality and fantasy world at the same time when I'm doing it. And so it's what I strive for and what I love. The bad side of that is you tend to overwrite also. You tend to just write every little detail and every little thing. So I also recommend I had the experience on the short that I'm producing now, as well as writing for Blood Mania, where it was just supposed to be 1/4 of a movie, so it couldn't be more than, say, 25, 30 pages. That it forces you to write economically. So I recommend to any writers, that think of what your weakness is and try to write a project that will force you to face that weakness. I overwrite, so writing shorts helps me fix that problem. If you tend to write all dialogue, if you tend to write dialogue heavy, write a screenplay that has no dialogue. If you tend to not write realistic dialogue, write a short where two people are sitting at dinner and they can't do anything except talk to each other. It becomes, you have to sort of, I mean, look, it's a competitive world out there. If you want to find a screenplay in LA, walk into a Starbucks and everybody at every table, as well as the baristas and people who aren't at work yet, are all going to have a screenplay for you. And I don't think I have to tell you, there's no shortage of Starbucks in LA. So it's critical to make sure that your talent and your skills are at 100%, which means facing your flaws as a writer and fixing them however you need to.
Yeah. So when you get one of these 16-hour bursts, how many pages will you churn out during those 16 hours?
I'll churn out 20, 25 pages sometimes. Sometimes I'll churn out 3. And then I also fall into the trap of rereading what I've written so far. So my first 25, 30 pages tend to be extraordinarily tight and great early because I rewrite them as I go. And every time I sit down at the computer, I rewrite them again and again. And then when you get to around page 60, 75, there'll be little notes in my Movie Magic screenwriter file that says, write something funny here. Or, introducing, I introduce character Joe on page 75. It's like, make sure you go back and introduce him earlier, but I know I need him here for this. So then you sort of backtrack it. So that's why that draft 0, no one gets to see, because it looks like I printed out a sheaf of papers and then threw them down the stairs and picked them up in the wrong order. It's a complete disaster. But then when I finally get what I consider to be a good first draft, it feels like $1 million. There's nothing quite like it.
Yeah. So then let's talk about your development process. Once you have that draft that you feel like is pretty competent, what does your development process look like? Do you have some trusted friends to send it out to, and then how do you get those notes back?
Yeah, I have. The first one who reads everything that I write is Signe. Because as much as I believe that structure is important, she is exceptional at identifying specifically where the structure went wrong and gives good suggestions how to fix it. There are a couple of script consultants I go to all the time. And then beyond that, it's sort of case by case. If I write a horror movie, I have friends in the horror industry that I think can speak specifically to the horror experience. With Hitlersaurus, it's going to be more of a tongue-in-cheek kind of action-adventure comedy monster movie. There are other people I think who will sort of get what I'm going for with that as well, and so on and so forth. With Scarecrow, with the short that I'm producing, I've given that to people I'm just acquaintances with because it's easy. I'll say, if you have a short of 10 pages, send it to me, and I'll send you my 10-page short. It's real easy to quickly turn it around. Mm-hmm. It's not as much of an imposition as a feature-length one is. So the important thing, I think, is not only to have a collection of people who are very close to you. That's important as well, but also to have a wide-reaching network as well. I think it needs to be broad and shallow, but with one section that's deep, of people who you trust and who trust you. And for those of your listeners who are new to writing, I know it can be really scary to give somebody something to read and get back critiques, but it is important to build up that callus on your soul to be able to accept that pain, and don't just give your script to your mom or give your script to somebody who's not experienced in developing screenplays. It's important that you are interacting with people who can tell you news that you don't want to hear, but that's important for you to hear.
Yeah, good advice for sure. So a couple of years ago, you did a Ask Me Anything thread on Reddit, and I just was looking through it, and I thought there were some great questions and great answers that you gave. And so I was just going to run through some of those, and I kind of might rephrase, so I apologize to anybody if I edit their question. But I just thought there were some really good questions, and the first one that I noticed, and I'll just kind of read it, but I think it could be even updated. As someone who sometimes sees a potential of movies just from an elevator pitch, how do you envision the definition of a promising film idea changing in the next 10 years, especially with the burgeoning television industry and heavy indie film presence on Netflix, and now we have Hulu and Amazon Prime, a whole bunch of these services. So what do you see as sort of the evolving pitch and how to make a compelling pitch as these other services really gain some traction?
It's a really difficult time when you start bringing up things like Netflix and so on, because I mean, even Netflix, which continues to have the reputation of being a place for indie films to go and so on, I feel like that's a little bit of an outdated notion. I think Netflix makes most of its money on existing intellectual property, just like the big studios do. I mean, look, I love Netflix, and I would marry it if it was legal it's amazing. But if you look at my recently viewed, it's going to be Mystery Science Theater 3000, The Return, existing IP. It's going to be Luke Cage, existing IP. It's going to be, The West Wing, which has been around for 1,000 years. It's going to be these same things. And you wind up you seeing Netflix as a place to go for your independent film, I think, is starting to become a little less reliable. I mean, it's hard to find movies on Netflix. Mm-hmm. It's not easy. And so what's going to come up is suggestions for you, and you're going to look at the suggestions, and many of them will be good. Their algorithm for that is fantastic. But it's going to be hard for me to get my movie in front of fresh eyes who aren't specifically seeking it out. So when I'm hearing pitches, I think in terms of, let's assume for the moment that the person pitching has written an excellent script. I mean, you sort of have to just sort of assume that that's the case. Otherwise, I don't want it regardless, mm-hmm. right? So what I'm thinking in terms of is, how do I get somebody interested in seeing that movie? How do I get someone to say, that's the one, click? And so sometimes that means a really catchy title. Sometimes it means one enduring image, because on Netflix, there's the one frame comes up. And if it's two guys like this getting ready to fight each other, I know it's an action movie. And if it's two guys doing this, I know it's a love story. Mm-hmm. That's all the information you get on Netflix a lot of the time. So it needs to be something that's very catchy and very hooky, something that's going to give me a nice hook. Otherwise, I think that it's smart to develop a television project. Netflix and Hulu and Amazon, I think, are fantastic for binge watching. And I think that it's the way people consume content nowadays is via the binge watch. So, and for writers, that's exciting. You can write a 12-chapter story. You can write it like a book. It becomes more of a challenge to get it produced. But if you write it well, then you're going to find more people who are interested in doing that. I think that it's critical to also, in your pitch, like, the fewer words, the better. It is going to be very important for me too, because I'm going to need to turn around and sell it to other people, and I need to do that in as few words as possible. It's a joke that people make all the time about how I'm writing something more complicated, and why is it that you need to be able to say it in 3 words, and why does everything have to be so high concept? And the answer is, it only has to be high concept if you want to raise the money to make it, or it's only important to. Unfortunately, we're in a business where things are expensive to produce, so it becomes critical to impress the people who are looking for reasons to say no, because they don't want to write a check that's going to eventually never come back to them. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be important to make your pitch be extremely smart. When I mentioned Hitler's Source earlier, it's a one-word pitch. When they came to me for Blood Mania, the pitch for my story was brief, but even more importantly, they knew that they could talk to me because I speak the language. So it's difficult to say, here's the advice on how to break in. Here's the advice on what to write if you want to break in, and how to pitch if you want to break in, because you'll post this podcast, and then 6 months from the time you put it up, all the answers are going to be obsolete. Mm-hmm. Things are moving that quickly. So again, with that, steering a ship that's already in motion, it's important to write what's important to you, and write and keep going and going and going. And then if you have a feature, and someone says, I want a feature, and you have a feature, and someone says they want a TV series that's close, you can adapt that and sort of make it, and it works great. You never know what you're going to do or who you're going to meet that's going to resonate with somebody. A friend of mine, I don't want to say too much because I don't think anything's really official yet, but a friend of mine also teaches screenwriting, and he uses a specific movie to teach structure. And this movie is not a slam bang blockbuster hit. It was a moderately successful movie from Michael J. Fox in the 1980s. And so he's seen the movie 1,000 times because he teaches it for his class. And he ran into somebody at one of the television networks who says, we're thinking about developing this movie into a series. And he just happens to be the only person in the world with encyclopedic knowledge of this movie. That's this, and so he's like, I'm your guy, and so all of a sudden this project's moving forward just because he keeps his writing skills up and he can produce this thing, but also because everything that he does sort of steers back towards trying to work on his career. And I think that's the sort of commitment you need. I encounter writers all the time who are just like, I just felt like writing one screenplay and I want to see what can go with it. And I encourage people, anyone who wants to write should be allowed to write. I just feel like the people they're competing with, the people who are saying, I want to do this for the rest of my life and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to do that. And that's a difficult hurdle to overcome if that's your competition.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious if at the PitchFest you've seen an uptick. I mean, we're in this golden age of television. There's a lot more TV series getting produced every year. Are you seeing more execs coming to the PitchFest looking for TV series and pilot episodes?
TV series, pilot episodes, web series are extremely popular. I think they're lower risk and they can easily be sort of turned into series like Broad City was and a few others. It's also a good exercise in writing economically and sort of being flexible in the medium that you want your project to go out on. But yes, we see executives who are looking for more and more of that. But really, I think look, executives, agents, managers, everybody who can help get your movie made is really just like you if you're a writer. They came to Hollywood because they wanted to make interesting and exciting stories that spoke to them. And I think a lot of these executives if they're looking for TV, it's because they love TV. And if they're looking for features, it's because they love features. And if they're looking for horror, it's because they love horror. It's really important for everyone to remember that when we say executives or we say the industry, it's hard to break in. We're just talking about people. People who look, I'm not going to lie to you. I try to go to the movies 3 times a week. I see, and if there's nothing new out that I'm particularly interested in, I'll see something I'm slightly interested in, or I will go to for example, tonight I'm going to the Alamo near me is showing Raising Arizona, which I've never seen on the big screen. And I love the Coen brothers and I love Raising Arizona. So I'm going, and you interact with other film fans and you sort of get another look at a movie that you love. But it's important to always be building that life around you. It's just you're diving headfirst into a pool and sometimes you can't see the bottom. And I know they tell you to go feet first time. But sometimes it's just, I forget what your question is. But,
I was asking about executives more, and the flip side of my question is, are you seeing more writers coming to the PitchFest with TV pitches? And I asked this question because I've had other people on where we've discussed this, and I run a script analysis service through Selling Your Screenplay, and I honestly don't feel like it's mostly feature films. Now that might be partly because that's what I'm about, and so maybe it's kind of somewhat self-fulfilling. But are you seeing more and more writers interested in TV and coming with TV pitches, coming with web series pilots?
I'll say this. I think that the numbers stick pretty close to the same, which is mostly features still. But a lot more of the questions that I get are what's the good structure for a pilot and for a first season of a series and so on. So I think it's sort of becoming part of it. It's sort of working its way in. People are recognizing that that's an option for them and sort of figuring out how to do it. But I don't think it's sort of the specs that we see at PitchFest are necessarily series yet. But I think that the people who are just sort of getting into it now, many more of them are TV oriented.
Yeah. Okay, so this is another question from the Reddit thread, and this is one that I get a lot, so I'll be curious to hear your take on it. What are your thoughts about pitching a screenplay backed up by additional material an example, spectacular location shots, set piece storyboards, maybe a video or scene or a poster or a trailer. What is your take on that?
In someone's office, the rules are a little bit different, but my feeling on this is I prefer a pitch that has none of those things. If they're available and I'm interested in the pitch the first time, I may ask for some of those materials, with the exception of maybe an animation project, so that if character designs are part of it. But by and large, I am not only interested in the screenplay that the person's writing, I'm interested in the person. I want to interact with the writer on a level of whether this person's going to be someone I want to work with through extremely stressful circumstances for a long period of time, which is what production is. And so I'm sort of assessing that person. And instead of assessing them, I'm watching them hold up a visual aid, or he's monkeying around with his DVD player or whatever else. I'm not getting that personal contact with them. So I think that it's important for me, like, the first step in any pitch that I've heard is overcoming nerves. They sit down and they're terrified of the pitch and they're nervous about everything. I'm just like, just calm down. Hi, I'm Bob. Tell me about yourself. I want to get an assessment of the person. If the writing's no good, then it's going to end at that point anyway. I don't care how good your supporting materials are. A bad script's a bad script. And if I'm going to have to bring someone in to rewrite it, then I will. And if I'm going to hire another director, he's going to have his own idea about locations and all this other stuff. So to me, I think that a writer needs to be strong on writing, and all the other stuff is for later stages. It's like asking someone to go away for the weekend on the first date. You don't do it. The first date is just getting to know each other a little bit, and that's what the pitch is. And then eventually, if I want to get to know about more of their materials or what they're thinking about it, then I'll ask. But until I read that script and the script is great, I'm not going to go to any effort to learn about anything beyond the script.
Yeah. So sound advice. So this was a question I thought was really interesting and worth exploring. It's very, very long, but basically this person laid out what was sort of a plan to getting his micro-budget film produced, and it went like something like the effect of, write a feature script, write a 12-part web series, and then produce a trailer, use the trailer to promote the Kickstarter. And they had this whole list, and then essentially your advice was, I would bump each item down a number and add this to the top. Start building your audience now. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit. What exactly do you mean by building an audience, and how can people do this?
Whether your project gets a theatrical release or goes directly to home video, is on Amazon or it's on Netflix or it's on Hulu or whatever it's on, you're going to be competing against the same competition. You're going to be against the same competition, and that competition is going to outmatch you in very, very, very important ways. Okay, so for example, right now, what's the big movie right now that's out? It's
Guardians of the Galaxy 2, yeah.
Okay, so Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is out right now. If you have a small independent film in the theaters right now, all the advertising, 3 of every 5 screens at every multiplex, all the posters, the standees, the popcorn tubs that have drawings on the side of it, the action figures, everything your kids are talking about is going to be Guardians of the Galaxy 2, right? No matter what. In a couple months, Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is going to be on Netflix or wherever it lands. And now if you have a movie going into Netflix or onto iTunes, what pops up? The first thing that's going to pop up on your screen is still going to be Guardians of the Galaxy 2 if it's on iTunes. Rent it from us, and so you're still competing against it. They're not going to put, what is that, The Pinch?
Yeah, that's
behind you.
That's my micro budget film. I'm in post production now, so that's it.
It looks great. Perfect example. So like if The Pinch hits Netflix the same day as Guardians of the Galaxy 2, or hits iTunes the same day as Guardians of the Galaxy 2, you're not going to have anyone's screen come up and say, rent The Pitch. It's going to be rent Guardians of the Galaxy 2. They just have the money for placement, and that's just how it's going to go. So the only thing that we have as independent filmmakers that those big studios don't have is sort of a grassroots one-on-one relationship with our people. So let's say you wrote a zombie movie. It's critical to you wrote a zombie movie, and if your time frame is 3 years before it's out, then you have 3 years to join every zombie and horror-related group on Facebook. You have time to join every horror and zombie related organization in your town. Some places have horror lovers conventions or Comic-Cons or whatever it is. You have all the time, you have those 3 years to, I don't know, go to film festivals in your area or other places. And one-on-one, just start meeting people and getting them to know you. It's like, hi, I'm Bob Schultz. Hi, I'm Bob Schultz. Not, hi, I'm Bob Schultz. Like my Facebook page. Another thing that I do is everyone I meet, I go on Google. I set up a Google alert for that person so that every day I get alerts from Google saying, John Smith just showed up in this webpage. Looks like his movie's going or whatever. So I send him a little email. Hey, congratulations. I saw your movie's going. Whatever it is, so that you sort of build up this network of people so that over the course of all these years, you are building a personal network of people who will support you when it comes to your movie. I'm not even simply talking financially, although that's great if you do a Kickstarter. It's not just financially, it's also emotionally, and it's also using their social networks to get the word out as well. So you build and you build and you build and you build and you start getting people interested in you. And if you want to get really ambitious about it, start a zombie newsletter, or start a webpage with all the zombie news that's fit to print. And so then you get subscribers to that, and those subscribers are going to be interested in your zombie, which then when yours goes, it can be George Romero puts out a new movie, new 28 Days Later movie, World War Z sequel coming out, The Pinch is a zombie movie coming out, and so like you just become one of the news items. Anything you can do to sort of build from a grassroots level, build your audience so that when the time comes, hey, my movie's out now, everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, I want to see it. And that's how you sort of build that. But you can't have that first contact with people be, here's what you can do for me. Like what you're doing is fantastic with your podcast and with your newsletter and so on. You can get the word out about The Pinch to people who already trust you and who already think that you bring something of value. If the first time you make contact with someone is buy The Pinch, everyone's like, I'm not going to buy The Pinch. I don't even know who you are. It amounts to cold calling. And if you can get a few thousand, maybe in the 5 figures, luckily in the 6 figures of people who will get excited about your movie or your series or whatever, it just helps. I mean, everyone thinks of the snowball rolling down the hill, but how much easier is it to make a great big snowball if the snowball's already this big when you start rolling it down the hill? Mm-hmm. And so I think, you can't compete with the big ones in building an audience. You have to do it over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm curious, and I talk about this. I mean, The Pinch is a good example. I did do a Kickstarter, and the vast majority of the Kickstarter money came from Selling Your Screenplay podcast listeners. So, thank you to those listeners. And I'm curious, was that sort of one of your motivations for starting PitchFest, was to sort of get yourself in the flow of things and meeting executives? And is that part of your own, brand building and audience building?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons that I got involved was to make these contacts. When Signe invented it, I also firmly believe in the procedure, and I believe in helping other writers. I think that all writers should help other writers instead of waiting for someone to help them and then returning the favor. Someone's got to go first. So many of the contacts who I have Hitlersaurus with now, I met through PitchFest. People who have hired me to come teach in places all around the world, I met through PitchFest. It's a networking job, and it's also, and not for nothing, but Signe and I, we put on a great event. It's valuable to be able to demonstrate that we can create something very good from the ground up, and that shows a certain amount of fortitude and commitment that is critical in taking a movie from the page to the screen.
Yeah, for sure. So this is another question, and it was kind of long-winded, and so I will just summarize it, but it was basically from an aspiring screenwriter outside of the United States, and he just talks about some of his potential problems. He was older, so he didn't feel like he could be an intern, and he didn't have any connections. And I'd be curious to get your advice. I get a lot of screenwriters from outside the U.S. This screenwriter, judging from his question, it looked to me like his English was perfect. It was perfectly written. Like there was no it was no translation problems. And I think that's a big step up for someone outside of the U.S. And probably there's two answers. If your English is perfect, there's probably one answer. If your English is not perfect, there's probably another. But maybe you can talk about that. What is your advice to people, outside of the U.S.? Maybe they don't have a lot of money to invest in online courses or online, PitchFest or whatever they could do online. What do you recommend to those folks and how they can potentially get their careers going?
I recommend, if they're not busy the weekend of June 23rd, to come to PitchFest in LA. But other advice I would give is this. It sounds like a cliche, but turning your challenges turning bugs into features. It's not a bug, it's a feature, is great advice. If you're from another country, that means that you have access to scenery that is expensive for anyone else to get to, right? That means you have access to a different tone, a different voice, maybe different funding also that others would not have access to, for example, Romania. Last time I checked, Romania the dollar was 4-to-1 in Romania. So anything that would cost $1 here would cost 25 cents there. So if you can raise $25,000, you can operate as if you had a $100,000 budget. So try to find things that cause you to have an advantage. And we live in a day and age now, probably even since that AMA, we live in a day and age now where things have changed. Every one of us can carry in our pockets a fully functional camera, and you can write a short to shoot your own stuff. Tangerine was a short that was Oscar nominated a couple of years ago, shot all on the iPhone. Yep. So there's no reason that living outside of the U.S. should be a hindrance now. It's just the process is going to be different. You write something, you shoot it, you put it up there online. You can do are you familiar with Fede Alvarez? He directed the Evil Dead remake.
No.
A few years back, they did a remake of Evil Dead, and Fede Alvarez directed it. And he got that job by sitting down and creating a short film where aliens invade, and he used After Effects and all this stuff and made a really cool little short that looked great. And it got to Sam Raimi's company, and they said, this could be your guy. He's got a great eye. And so he got the job off of just sitting down and doing it himself. It turns out he was in America. He may have been in Mexico, but even if he was in America, Mexico, Romania, Australia, stationed at the North Pole, that's something you can do, and YouTube gets everywhere. So there's no reason for you to sort of think, well, geez, I'm not in America anymore. Unfortunately, if you're not willing to come and build that network here, you need to use your other skills that you have and use the internet. And so if you say, I never wanted to be a director, but I had to get someone to read my scripts, that's great. I have been a writer by choice, producer by necessity for 5 years now. The producing part of it only came because I wanted to be a writer, and so that's the skill. So I guess what I'm saying is find whatever country you're from, assuming your English is pretty flawless, whatever country you're from, figure out something that is unique to that country, write a short that exploits that thing that is unique to your country, and put it on YouTube and tell people, hey, I'd be interested, You can make contacts. There are lots of ways you can make contacts. Selling your screenplay, you put up leads all the time. Mm-hmm. So use the opportunities that are there to say, here's what I've done and here's what I can do. And even though I'm not in America, I'd like an opportunity.
Yeah, good advice. So this is another question I get a lot, and I'd be curious to get your take on it. It basically is a similar form of this, but is LA really the best place to go if you want to be a filmmaker? And sort of, the other permutation of that is, do I really have to move to LA to be a screenwriter? I'd be curious to get your take on this.
If you want to work in television, the answer is pretty much 100% yes. Just because it's a staff job, you have to show up for work, and work's in LA, so you don't want to fly in every day. But for a feature, I'm not going to lie, there are still people in the industry who sort of take whether or not you're living in LA seriously. They see it as a commitment to yourself, or they see it as a commitment to the industry. I can't explain why, but the reality is this: we live in a day and age where, just to cover all bases, here's what I recommend: go to LA once, get a mailbox, get a 323 area, get a 323 phone number for your phone, and then go back home. If you can get representation in LA, that's great too. But people will call you and you say, hey, I'd love to have a meeting with you tomorrow. And then you say, oh, geez, you know what? I'm visiting my folks now. I'm out of town. Can we make it next Tuesday? And then you run home and get on cheapo air and fly to LA. I mean, I think it's really 20th century thinking, but I think that there are probably still plenty of executives who still use fax machines. So that is also 20th century thinking.
Yeah. So one of the things I've found just being in LA, and you lived in LA for quite a long time, didn't you?
Yeah, I hated every minute of it.
Is that right? I don't know. I love LA, so it hasn't been a hardship to me. But one of the things, you just run into people in the industry, and it's very easy to just bump into these people and not have to have forced conversations with them. I do adventure guys through the YMCA with my 7-year-old daughter, and a bunch of the other dads. Some of them work in the industry. Just there was no planning on that. It's just the way it is in LA, and so you get to know some of these people, and I just. It seems like there's a lot of intangible reasons to be in LA that are really valuable, and they're hard to quantify.
I agree with you there. I think that there are advantages to living in LA for sure. Basically, what you said is the biggest one is that I was in LA for some meetings one time. I was in Starbucks, and 3 people behind me online at Starbucks in Studio City was Quentin Tarantino. So I'm like, that doesn't necessarily happen in Boise, Idaho, and so of course I bought Tarantino's coffee for him. And so my run-in with Tarantino was him doing this. That was the whole thing. Totally worth the $4. Yeah. But just the same, it's, that sort of thing where you can always sort of be on and be in it is a huge advantage of living in LA. Now, when I was in LA, it's just not the town for me. I mean, I have a lot of people who love LA, and when I'm there, I enjoy it too, knowing that I don't live there. But it's I couldn't write particularly well. My creativity was stymied, and it didn't go particularly well for me. So if I'm there, it's easier to network to get scripts that I can't write in front of people, or if I'm someplace else and I can write better, then I can get the scripts together. And then I go to LA. I mean, right now I'm based in Phoenix, so if I need to go to LA, I can be there in a day. I can be there, and I can be there in a matter of hours if necessary. And so I find that works best for me. But I think if anyone is saying the reason that I wasn't successful is I didn't move to LA, is probably fooling themselves a little bit, because there are opportunities outside of that too. Every decision you make has pros and cons. You just need to figure out what cons can you face given your strengths, and what pros can you take advantage of because they boost some of your weaknesses. And that's going to be different for every person.
Yeah, for sure. So how can people see Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Mania and Breakdown Lane? Are they on iTunes? Any place they're available? I can link to those in the show notes.
Yeah, I'll send you the links. Blood Mania is on Amazon, and I think I need to find the exact link for Breakdown Lane. Okay, so I don't have the answers for you on that.
No problem. I'll get that. Yeah, and I'll put that in the show notes. So just quick to wrap up the interview, what's the best way for people to just keep up with you and the Script Fest? You can mention Twitter, Facebook, your website, whatever you're comfortable sharing. And again, I'll round that stuff up and put it in the show notes.
Sure. Just anyone can email me. It's bob@scriptfest.com. I love answering questions and whatever else. You can follow our just if you search for Great American Pitch Fest on Facebook, you'll find our Facebook page. Twitter is at the Pitch Fest, and personally on Twitter I am PitchFest Bob.
Perfect. Yep, I'll grab all that stuff. And once again, maybe just tell us the dates for the Pitch Fest in Burbank here in a couple of weeks.
Sure. The Pitch Fest is at the Burbank Marriott Hotel and Convention Center, June 23rd through the 25th, 2017. The schedule is available at scriptfest.com. And once again, if you have any questions, bob@scriptfest.com. I'll hook you up.
Perfect. I really appreciate it, Bob. And I had a scheduling conflict this year. I'm out of town, but next year I definitely want to come. I have never been, so I look forward to actually meeting you in person one day soon.
See that you do.
Perfect. We'll talk to you later, Bob.
All right.
Bye.
Good luck on the pitch. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. A quick plug for the SYS Screenwriting Analysis Service. It's a really economical way to get a high-quality professional evaluation on your screenplay. When you buy our 3-pack, you get evaluations at just $67 per script for feature films and just $55 for teleplays. All the readers have professional experience reading for studios, production companies, contests, and agencies. You can find a short bio on each writer on our website, and you can pick the reader who you think is the best fit for your script. Turnaround time is usually just a few days, but rarely more than a week. The readers will evaluate your script on 6 key factors: concept, characters, structure, marketability, tone, and overall craft, which includes formatting, spelling, and grammar. Every script will get a grade of pass, consider, or recommend, which should help you roughly understand where your script might rank if you were to submit it to a production company or agency. We can provide an analysis on features or television scripts. We also do proofreading without any analysis. We will also look at a treatment or outline and give you the same analysis on it. So if you're looking to vet some of your project ideas, this is a great way to do it. We will also write your logline and synopsis for you. You can add this logline synopsis writing service to an analysis, or you can simply purchase it as a standalone product. As a bonus, if your script gets a recommend from a reader, you get a free email and fax blast to my list of industry contacts. This is the exact same blast service I use myself to promote my own scripts, and it's the same service I sell on the website. It's a great way to get your script into the hands of producers who are looking for material. So if you want a professional evaluation of your screenplay at a very reasonable price, check out www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/consultants. In the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing screenwriter Tom Hines, who wrote the film Mother's Day, which stars Julia Roberts and Jennifer Aniston, among many other great actors. He has an interesting story on how he broke in. He had a long career working with the great director and producer Gary Marshall, and we talked through exactly how he established that relationship and how that really blossomed into a lot of writing assignments over the years. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's interview with Bob. I've mentioned this a number of times on the podcast, but I think it's worth repeating here. In the business, the online business startup world, there is this phrase that gets tossed around that's called an unfair advantage. It basically means that a person or company has some sort of advantage over the competition because of some particular experience or resource. And I'll just give you a quick example. Let's say someone worked as a pool cleaner during their summer vacation during college. Then after graduating and working as a computer programmer for a number of years, they start looking around and trying to come up with ideas for creating their own app. And they remember back to their days as a pool cleaner, and they remember some of the challenges that pool cleaners face, and they come up with an idea that could help solve this particular problems that pool cleaners have. That person with their programming skills and experience as a pool cleaner has what's called an unfair advantage over other programmers or companies trying to create apps for pool cleaners, because he has a real working knowledge of the problems that pool cleaners face. Plus, he probably also still has some contacts in the pool cleaning industry, so he can utilize those contacts to help beta test his app, and eventually even using those contacts to help market his app. So in the example I just mentioned, just replace the words programmer with writing skills. Hopefully, if you want to be a screenwriter, you have some writing skills to bring to the table. And then replace pool cleaner with your own particular experiences. I'll give you another quick example. The spec script I'm finishing up right now, it's sort of a horror thriller which takes place at a tech startup company. I've worked at a number of tech startups over the years, so I understand how these companies operate. So it's going to be hard for someone to write this particular script who hasn't worked at a startup. But the real key here is understanding what sort of experiences you have and how you can use those to your advantage in your writing. There's the old advice, it gets tossed around a lot, write what you know. I think in some ways that's what they're talking about when that advice is given. It's not necessarily a literal write what you know, but use what you know, your experiences that you have that are very specific and particular to you. Use those experiences to texture your writing, to kind of make your writing feel more fuller, to world build, and all those things really, really can, as I said, enhance the actual screenplay. So now let's take that even a step further, which I think is really getting into some of what Bob has done with his 2 projects that are coming out this year. Forget about the actual writing of the screenplay. Is there any way that you can use your specific experiences in life or in work, anything you have, as your unfair advantage to selling your screenplays. Bob has some real skills in networking. I mean, just creating an event like ScriptFest takes a lot of networking, getting all of those executives to come to the event. So he's created a whole event around networking, and he's really made that a big part of his strategy. Again, I think it probably comes more naturally to him, networking to him, than maybe a lot of us. We don't necessarily feel as outgoing or friendly or the ability to network as Bob does. But again, I'm not saying everybody has to create their own ScriptFest. Everybody has to create their own situation that uses their own experiences. As mentioned, I've worked for a number of startups over the years, so launching something like Selling Your Screenplay was a very natural fit to me. I've talked about this on the podcast before, but Selling Your Screenplay has very directly helped my own screenwriting career. I've optioned scripts through producers I've met. Through Selling Your Screenplay, I've gotten writing assignments as well through some of the people that I've met through Selling Your Screenplay. So all of these things sort of have helped. And again, I think Bob's own ScriptFest has helped his career as well. I keep talking about on the podcast week after week, I keep coming on and talking about producing your own material. I think I'm talking about that a lot right now because that's sort of the focus of my own career. I'm spending a lot of time producing my own feature film, The Pinch. But, I don't want to make it seem like that's the only way to succeed or that's the best way to succeed. For me, it was a very natural fit. Again, I've run numerous online businesses over the years, including Selling Your Screenplay, and all of those skills, managing people, managing time, managing money, all of those skills are what producing is all about. So again, producing was a fairly natural fit to me. Talking to Bob, I think it was a fairly natural fit for him as well. I mean, producing an event like ScriptFest is, it's a huge undertaking. And I'm sure a lot of the skills he has producing ScriptFest are very translatable to producing a feature film. Again, it's about managing time, money, and people. Really, it's like that's what running a business is all about. And producing a movie is really just about running a business for a particular amount of time. So again, these are all skills that he has. It was a very natural fit. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the angle you have to take. This might not be a good fit. Producing might not be a good fit for you. But if it's not, what can you do to give yourself that unfair advantage? Just throw out some examples here. If you work in sales, maybe you're good at cold calling, and so maybe you should pick up the phone and start cold calling production companies and pitching them your material. If you work as a lawyer, maybe you can offer your legal services to producers and network with producers that way. Get to know producers by offering them something that has value. Again, all producers at some time or another, they're going to need legal services. So that could be a very natural fit. Same thing for bookkeeping, accounting. I mean, producers are going to need these types of skills, and maybe that's a way for you to just network and get to know producers, and then you can start to, hopefully down the road, maybe even pitch them some of your own projects. I mean, this is kind of an out there example, but I was trying to just come up with some examples that are not so clean cut. It seems like, if you're a lawyer, the legal services is a pretty, straightforward idea to come up with. What if you're a horse trainer? Maybe you can move to the Los Angeles area and start to offer your horses up for free or below market rate to producers who are making films that need horses. I mean, there's just a million things, that an infinite number of ideas that you could come up with, and it's going to be very specific to your situation. So think about what you have and think about how that might be something that a producer could use, and maybe you can find a way to offer those services up. I mean, again, these ideas, maybe they're not going to specifically work for you, but just be creative, come up with ideas, and get yourself out there. The advice that I see tossed around so often, just write a great script. That's a very steep mountain to climb. Is it possible to make that work? Of course. I mean, some people are able to just write a script, focus solely on screenwriting. That script takes off and that launches their career. It does happen to people, and that's certainly one angle. But again, it's a very, very steep mountain to climb if you just put yourself in the position of saying, well, I'm just going to outwrite the competition. I mean, all the greatest writers in the world in this day and age are descending on Hollywood with their scripts. And, it's literally like the greatest writers in the world are coming here and trying to make a living at this. So that's just a really steep mountain to climb to just say, I'm going to be a better writer. I'm going to outwrite all those other writers. Hopefully you're a good writer. Hopefully you're a great writer. And that can be a piece of it. But there's a lot of great writers out there that are not making a living from writing. And again, finding that unfair advantage and having the great writing coupled with some other angle, I think is a winning combination. and just really, again, just something to think about. It's going to be very specific to your skills and your situations. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.